Good evening, everyone. I'm going to ask you all to kindly have a seat, and if you'd be kind enough to come up to the front. Every seat has a sheet on it that I want to make sure people read so that they know what's going to happen. So thank you very much. Come up to the front part, please. There's a front set of seats. We'd like you up here. Though those chairs are more comfy down in the back, I've got to admit. Thank you so much. It's just a delight to see you all here. Good evening to everyone. My name is Julia Steed Mawson, and on behalf of the Pelham Wyndham Pipeline Awareness Outreach Working Subcommittee, oh, the evening's done, the name took that long. I'd like to welcome you here this evening. This is an evening that we've waited for and worked hard for, and I would like you to meet the people that made that happen. So if I could have the committee please come forward for a second. And we have volunteers that are also holding the fort in the committee out in the front room, so you're going to have to imagine their spirit is here. And I'd like you to please give these wonderful folks a round of applause. They have been working every week for about 2 months, thinking about what this should look like and how to do it, and here we are. So we're really delighted. So thank you very, very much. Such a wonderful team to work with. I feel really privileged. You will also meet a whole variety of other people this evening. And so I would like our both our workshop presenters and our poster session presenters to please stand up. And if you would do that now. Our poster session presenters. And if you look around the room, you can see several folks that you're going to be meeting tonight. And you'll get to meet them and hopefully have a conversation with them. So if we could give them a round of applause as well. Thank you. Many, many years ago, Dr. M.K. Smith from the University of New Hampshire, who was an animal scientist who studied world food systems, once said that a good democracy requires people who are well-educated and well-fed. So tonight, we're trying to do a little bit of both. So we hope that the well-fed part, that you'll take advantage or have taken advantage of that. So thank you to all the volunteers that made that happen. I brought the apples because of the whole food group thing. You know, you try to keep it balanced. And as far as the well-educated part, that's what we're hoping to do here tonight. The Kinder Morgan Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline project is a very, very complicated one. And it's not easy to wrap our brains around all of the complexity. So what we wanted to do was to give you all an opportunity to begin, if you don't know much about the pipeline project, to begin that learning, and for those of you that know something about it, to be able to start digging deeper. And so we have set up this evening for you in 3 components. Our open house poster session, which I hope many of you were engaged in. And then, of course, our keynote, which I will introduce in a minute. And then after that, there will be 4 breakout sessions. And we will tell you how that will happen later on. But we wanted to make sure that the learning that you have here is really a smorgasbord. So you're not necessarily going to get tons of in-depth, but really a smorgasbord. And then from there, we're hoping that you'll see this as a springboard to longer and larger and different learning opportunities. So having said all of that, what I'd like to do is to get us started. I would ask a couple of things. We called it a pipeline conversation because we really want it to be a conversation. There are no easy answers to very complex problems that affect our energy, our communities, our environment. And so therefore, we want to make sure that the kind of dialogue that we have together is positive. We may not always agree, we may have very different viewpoints, but we hope we'll all be learning together. And at the end of it, all of us coming out with more in our backpacks. So please note that on the back of your agenda, that I've noted some things, or I should say we, as a committee, have noted some things, and we'd like you to think about that as we ask questions of each other, as we speak to our presenters, that we always consider the fact that we're doing that with great respect. The other thing is, please note that there are children here as well who have come with their parents, and children have been a big part of the pipeline awareness movement for many, many months. And that's because these things affect them. So I'd like to also remind you and caution you that in this citizenship event, and this is true citizenship here, that we're thinking about modeling the kind of behavior that we would love our young people to engage in when they're involved in citizenship as well. So having said all of that, I cannot tell you how much, and I'm speaking for all of us, how much we appreciate you coming out here tonight. So having said all that, now let's begin. I would like you to meet Carolyn Zook, and you can stand, from Drake Pipeline Awareness, and I'd like you to meet, we'll do that. And I'd like you to meet Sam Matthews from New Ipswich Pipeline Resistance. And as you go through the evening, please note, and you'll see it right on your agenda, that we have really tried to bring you your neighbors. There are things that are affecting us here in Drake and Pelham, but this pipeline extends to the west of us and is impacting our beautiful rural treasures to the west. So keep in mind, it's not just us, it's many, many, many families that are struggling to make good decisions about their land and their communities. So please try to get to know folks. Our good folks, Laura and Ken Lynch from Temple, our good folks from Mason, Joe McGuire. When he stands up, he's very tall, so you can't miss him. So all of the communities along the pipeline, they may not be here in body, but they are definitely represented here in spirit. So now, having said that, I would like to turn this over to Sam and Carolyn. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Quite an honor to see all these people here. A few things. I don't fit nearly any of the things that Julia just said. I'm not a citizen, but I am involved. And I've got an awful lot of friends who are citizens, which is why I did get involved, because this is not right. A bit before. Thank you. So what we're going to start with is we're going to try and learn from the bad experiences that other towns have had, one in particular, in earlier installations of this type, where they have had awful health results from living near a compressor station, and there's going to be one just down the road from here if this goes in. But they failed to do anything about it because they didn't prepare in time. So I'm going to tell you what happened in the town of Neversink in New York. And from that, we're going to learn from what happened there. And hopefully, you guys can arm yourselves against this. We are doing the same in New Ipswich. We also have a compressor station proposed for our town. There is another one just like that in Northfield, Mass, and another one further west in Windsor, Mass. All of us are trying to learn from the things that went wrong in Neversink. It is going to be the same as there, unless we do some of the things that we have to know about and be prepared to pay for. Kinder Morgan is probably not going to pay for this. If we want to do these things, we are going to have to raise the money to do it. We recently attended, several of us, a large presentation by the DEC in Temple. They are supposed to represent our interests on a state basis against federal projects like this one. They took the stage in front of hundreds of people in Temple and basically showed us that they don't really have our interests at heart. The one thing that comes out of all of this that we're trying to do is before this all starts, before they start this machine up, this compressor station, we have to take samples of air in particular, but also water, soil, anything like that, so that once the compressor station starts working, we have baseline data to compare it to. The town of Neversink did not do that, and therefore when they went to court, they could not prove their case. So I'm going to go through the story of Neversink, and we'll try and learn. Soon after the compressor station started working in Neversink, residents reported nosebleeds, headaches, asthma, and rashes. The Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project conducted health and air quality studies. They found volatile organic compounds, which are normally just referred to as VOCs, as expected, and they captured them at their testing points around the compressor station. They found higher than expected particulate matter to be present, and that's the stuff that does the damage. Elevated amounts of particulate matter, and particulate matter is measured by the size of the particular particles, at 2.5 were found. They were found at the 17 to 20 micrograms per cubic meter in the air. That's 3 times the national average of such pollutants. And it's well above the EPA recommended upper limit of 12 milligrams. Multiple episodes of peaks into the hundreds, as high as 426 micrograms, were also recorded at the station. One home near the compressor station had an average of 64 micrograms. There's a June 2015 study from Harvard shows that health risks with particles of 2.5 levels above 6 include reduced lung function, heart disorders, and increased blood pressure. Each 1 microgram per cubic meter above that increases the mortality rate by 1% for people over 65. The December 2014 Harvard study shows high PM 2.5 levels in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy doubles the risk of newborn autism. Now, in Minisync, the thing that they didn't do, which I'm encouraging you guys to get your selectmen, your representatives to help you do, is they did no pre-construction air quality or health assessments. When they did the testing after the compressor station was started up, they found the following in there, and not all of these I can even pronounce. They found VOCs, they found methane, acetone, ethyl benzene, dichlorate fluoromorph, something or other, ethanol, and a whole bunch, propane. I'm just picking out the ones I can pronounce. Toluene, and the others I got nowhere near. All of these are really bad. At 41,000 horsepower, which is the size of the compressor station they're proposing in New Ipswich, the town I come from, and in Northfield, the compressor station would be over 3 times the size of the one that they put in Minisync. It may well be that Kinder Morgan goes back to their original size compressor for these towns, which is 80,000 horsepower. Draycott's, I believe, is currently at 18,000, although it started off at 22 or 23. But again, Kinder Morgan can change this at will, it seems. These installations are going to be close to homes, dozens of homes in New Ipswich, and by the look of the maps here, pretty close to a lot of other residential facilities here. And schools, and your wells, and your water sources. Air pollution would easily reach the centres of all the surrounding towns, depending on the wind direction. This is a picture of a typical larger compressor station. I can't tell you what size this one is. A lot of the installations are actually kept quite secret. They're there, you can see them, but you cannot get any information about them. Earthworks is a non-profit organisation dedicated to protecting residents from the effects of energy production and transportation. They've worked with the Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project and with one person whose name comes up again and again in these situations, a lady called Wilma Subra, who has been a pain in the side of numerous gas transportation companies. Their findings include actual pollutants from compressor stations exceed the modelling. Thank you, bless you. No compressor here yet. But they exceed the modelling estimates that were made prior to construction. They also found 90% of individuals within a 2 to 3 mile radius of the compressor station experienced some sort of health problem. Other people that have been at the forefront of these projects in trying to prove to the EPA, to the companies that put them in, to their local health authorities about the problems caused on this, one of the people is a Dr. David Brown. Now at the end of this, I've got pages and pages of citations and reference websites that people can go to find out more. I don't think that you can have a chance, or I don't think it's worth showing them to you long enough that you can try and write these things down. But there are on the tables over there free handouts listing all of these resources. Please go to them. Some of them take quite a lot of wading through, but it's all solid stuff. This is not opinion, this is fact. What we have not been able to do yet is to get government and industry people to accept that. When it comes time to propose a compressor station, in order to get the thing approved, they have to model the expected emissions from such a unit. Companies doing, this is put out to companies, third parties, to try and come up with that. They all, I'm sure this wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but they somehow or other manage to end up with the figures they want, not the figures that we think are true. So everything is based on very low projections. Now the problem with that is, if you have low projected emissions for one of these compressors, it then gets designated as a minor source of pollutants. If that happens, they have to comply with much more lax inspection, much more lax building and project permissions. If they actually went ahead and put out the information that we believe to be true, most of these installations would be classified as a major source of pollutants. That changes the whole ball game. Dr. Wilma Subra came up with that the rules and regulations have minor and major emitters. The companies always make sure they are just below the concentration that would make them major. Because when you're major, you have to comply with a whole lot more modelling. They all want to be minor sources. Dr. David Carpenter, Director of the Institute for Health and Environment at the University of Albany, he is speaking in Nassau, New York. There's a good video of this speech. Again, it's listed on the things, on the papers, on the benches there. Well worth watching. And he tries to make things, bring them down to my level. So I'm not a scientist, I don't understand any of this stuff in depth, but he manages to bring it across. In order to stop this, we have to somehow get our governor and our congressional delegation engaged on this. So far, they have all managed to avoid that in New Hampshire. They make gestures of being interested. They'll come and visit us. They'll come and talk to us. But none of them will stand up in public and say, I am against this pipeline. I will fight it. None of them will do that. Now, I'm sure Julia's going to have more to say about this further on through here, but let me draw your attention to the fact that at this point, we have planned a rally in Concord for December the 11th, that's a Friday. I know it's a work day, but nearly everybody I know in the organisations against this, we're taking the day off work, we're going up to Concord, and we're going to have a rally there. And the principal point of that rally is to present to the Governor a petition which we set out to have 10,000 signatures on, and I believe it is now nearer 11,000. So we are going to present this petition to the Governor and tell her and show her this is what southern New Hampshire thinks of this pipeline. We want it stopped, and we think with your support we can make that happen. I'm just going to flick through this reference material because, like I said, it's over there. Carolyn's waiting to speak in a moment, so I'm going to go through that. But the next steps are engage with your local representatives, tell them that you demand pre-construction air and water and soil testing, because you're going to need it if this kind of thing comes through and you want to fight it. Try and get the medical community involved. There is a doctor from Boston's Children's Hospital who, in his own time, using his own resources, is travelling around to various towns to give talks on the health effects of compressor stations. I've heard his talk, he's very good. We are trying to get him to come to New Ipswich at the school in Temple, because that is only a quarter of a mile from our compressor station, and give a talk there. I will gladly pass on information about this doctor to anybody that would be interested in trying to get him to come here as well. So, I believe that this whole presentation is being videoed and recorded. Aim is to get that out on social media. Please do your bit. Tell everybody, people about this. I've got business cards with me. If anybody has particular things they want to know and don't get a chance to speak to me here now, we can communicate with each other that way. Now, Caroline is going to speak just next, and can we then reserve any questions that anybody might have until after both of us have spoken, and we expect to have a short period to be able to answer those then. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you. My name is Caroline Zook. I'm from Drake, Massachusetts. Thank you for inviting me to speak before you this evening. I also see some familiar faces from Drake and also even some familiar faces from Pelham. So again, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. This is similar to a presentation I gave to the Drake Board of Selectmen back on October 27th. It's one thing to talk about compressor stations, but it's easier to talk about the criterion and the effects of a compressor if you know something about the engineering design. And let me get into a couple of specifics. I am a design engineer, not a compressor design engineer, but I do hold a degree from Wentworth Institute of Technology. And back in 1984, when it was very unpopular, I actually took a summer program at MIT called Environmental Corrosion and Degradation of Materials. And I said, well, gee, when would I ever use this knowledge? Well, we're using it now. You see here a picture. What exactly is a compressor station? If I look behind me, you see over to the left, there's a lineup of what are called compressor engines. Let's talk about the engines for a moment. Our previous speaker, Sam Matthews, pointed out, I saw in his slide presentation, try to push for electric. You might say, well, why go with electrical driven or gas driven? Well, Kinder Morgan will tell you electrical is quieter. But what they don't tell you, which you should make note of, if you have it electrically driven, you have to comply with stricter air quality standards. And that might give you a hint that although it's electrically driven, it's going to have more thrust and it's going to go faster and there's going to be more throughput and more chemicals. If you look over to the right, you see condensers. And in the back, you see some exhaust pipes. All the gas coming into a compressor station is coming from a set amount of distance. If you have a compressor, it's because that gas has already traveled some 40 to 100 miles. And as the gas travels, especially in New Ipswich and where the topography and terrain may vary, that gas is going to pick up friction. And believe me, these companies use chemicals already in those pipes to try to reduce that friction. And they want to move that gas along and keep it pressurized at a certain point so that it won't lose too much pressure. And then when it arrives at a compressor station, they use all of these conglomerates of engines and this collection of equipment to not only depressurize a little, but increase the pressure, because it has already lost some pressure due to the friction. So you're going to have the noise and the emissions, chemical washdowns to remove some of the component and particulates, and then it may have to exhaust if the pressure is too high. Compressor stations can come in various shapes and sizes. This one happens to be a compressor station in Pennsylvania. It's hard to say from looking at the picture whether it's an 18,000 horsepower machine or 85,000 horsepower machine, but the whole idea behind this is that the compressor stations themselves are often designed in terms of concealment, how much they want to conceal from view, how much power is required to repressurize that gas to push it along its next destination. And they also don't mention too much about the metering stations. They seem to want to downplay this, Kinder Morgan that is. So let's get into some of that as well. This is not quite a metering station just yet. We have a sample of what happens when a blowdown occurs. This is something that everyone should pay attention to. A blowdown is referred to an unplanned event, and there are unplanned, unscheduled maintenance events, and there are things called blowdowns which could actually happen at any time randomly without prediction, in which a lot of air, particulates, all kinds of chemicals can be thrust into the air because there's an emergency situation to prevent the compressor from failing. Once again, we need to review that the components of the system, you have to understand that gas is coming in at a very high rate of speed. You also have a lot of chemical agents, and many of them are proprietary. The company Kinder Morgan doesn't feel obligated to tell you about many of these chemical compositions. And that's something we really need to pay attention to, and we really need to push back. Because if we don't push back, what you'll find is if this should go through, you may not even know what is coming through the exhaust stacks. And as you can see from the prior presentation, with all of the chemicals that are involved, the washdown procedures and all of the other things that come about, this is not something that you really want to fool around with. Now, the baseline studies are extremely important. When you're talking about air quality, when you're talking about emissions, if we do not know what we currently have for air quality, if we don't know what we have in our soils, if we don't know, for example, at the Exxon station, if there's any still residual contaminants that were left over from the prior Exxon company, where they're currently trying to locate the compressor at this time, then we have nothing to safeguard against. When the noise levels increase, if we suddenly get noise levels above 55 decibels, which they claim the average operating noise will be that of a vacuum cleaner or a dishwasher, but if you have an unplanned event and those levels exceed far beyond that amount, and suddenly you're thrown out of bed at 2 in the morning and you don't know what this is it a jet engine crashing in my backyard? You won't know. And we don't want to subject our children, ourselves, the animals, wildlife, anybody does not want to be subjected to these excessive limits. Should go. This is an example of an emergency blowdown. If one takes a look at the scenery, you see what's happening here. This can go on for a period of time, and you see in this picture, this compressor station was located in open space. The compressor stations we're talking about being designed for this area are not going to be in open space. They may be in some area of forestry. And not all of those chemicals are going to evaporate quickly and dissipate into the atmosphere as Kinder Morgan would like you to think. Some of them may hang around for 4 days, depending on the weather conditions. You can see also this looks to be probably Midwest or California, where the atmospheric conditions are very different. We are not located near the seashore per se, where this will all maybe go out to sea. You have to examine the prevailing wind. So if you take Drake, for example, if they decide to locate this compressor station on Route 113 Broadway Road, and the prevailing wind is headed toward the Parker Village development, who thinks now that the route has changed so they're not affected, well, think again. And this happens to Pelham as well. We understand there already is a compressor station in order of 6,100 horsepower, already emitting something of this type, and there are issues and health problems and upper respiratory disturbances. You can be assured that if Drake receives a compressor station of 18,000 horsepower to 23,000 horsepower, it will be magnified even more so. And in addition to that, Kinder Morgan as a company, they don't like to build things small. They plan to expand everywhere that they go. There's always an expansion plan in mind. So these are some of the unknowns. I'm sorry for the delay in having shown this to you, but I felt it was important for you to see that emissions are the key word of the day, and baseline studies, air quality, groundwater, noise, soils. If you don't know where you stand with these environmentals, they're not going to tell you. And if the machine and devices come in, you can't change it. One argument you might present is, well, I've talked to the Board of Health, I've talked to the selectmen, I don't think I'm getting too many answers. Write again, and write some more, and haunt their offices. I'm a regular haunt at the Drake Board of Selectmen's meeting, as Selectman Kathy Richardson will attest. We need answers. We need answers. So I want to thank you for coming tonight. I hope this was enough to give you some information to think about and act upon. Don't just take it home. The metering station is a very necessary piece in the whole design scheme. When you have a compressor station, obviously the gas has arrived at its destination and it has to go somewhere else. It may have to be split off into what's called laterals, different areas or customers who may want that gas. And when you have a metering station, it receives that gas from the compressor and it has to be qualified. The company, Kinder Morgan, Tennessee Gas, wants to make sure it has the utmost quality of that gas, and it has to look for a combustibility property. If it doesn't have that certain level of combustibility, they can't get their price. So they're going to have components in that station that are used to dehydrate and remove hydrocarbon mist. And you might say, what do they do with it? Well, it has to have a containment system, and there are particular requirements for those. Right now, we do not know what those components are, what they're doing, and what type of containment specifications they've come up with. Those are the key questions we have to start asking and demanding those design specifications so that we can be assured, should this go in, that we have some handle on it. Because if you don't, they'll design it the way they like, to the lowest possible threshold. We also have to ask ourselves if they contain something, and the metering station may look like a simple box, but the metering station has a lot of sophisticated equipment. It has a lot of computerized equipment, and both the metering station and the compressor station have what's called a programmable logic controller. We should ask some questions about that as well. Kinder Morgan plans to control these stations, for the most part, remotely. If that PLC, programmable logic controller, becomes compromised in any way, we have to ask ourselves the question, who will gain control of that station? So you may be sitting here in the audience tonight thinking about leaks in the pipe. I'm thinking if this programmable logic gets compromised and the wrong type of software person gets hold of it, you have to ask yourself, who has control of that station? It may not be Kinder Morgan. So we need to ask questions about backup systems. Will there be a local dispatching center? Does it have to be controlled from Texas? We understand there's some type of a facility in Agawam. None of these are solidified. These are all unknowns. And as you can see, the metering station looks fairly benign. If you drive by on the road, you say, well, gee, it looks like a simple shed. There's a lot going on inside. Here's another example of a compressor with stacks that are filtering emissions, and there are caps on top. But again, this is only something we see from a distance. What is it actually doing? How much does it filter? When does it filter? How often do they change the filters? What is the maintenance plan, scheduled or unscheduled? None of these questions are being answered. And once again, to credit Sam Matthews, if you do not ask these questions now, and Kinder Morgan does their filing on November 20th, you don't have a chance to ask those questions after that time. You can't change that design. So we should not be shy about approaching our town officials and elected officials and saying, we want to see the design specifications. If the town tells you, well, we don't have money to hire a consultant, in many of the awareness groups all across from here to Western Mass and even in New Hampshire, there are many, many qualified people who can look at the specifications. And I'm sure many would do it without charge. Yes?
At the very beginning of your talk, when you were talking about whether electricity or gas would run the engines, go over that again, please.
Yes, the question is whether the compressor station is driven by a gas engine versus an electrical-driven turbine. You want to pay attention to that because gas will be noisy. Obviously, the gas already comes through, and there's something else to mention about electrical. If you look up any information about these electrically driven turbines, yes, they're a little bit quieter, but again, there's a rapidity, an increase in speed and throughput in which they can react fast, but that doesn't mean you'll have less emissions, and there are more air quality standards that apply. Additionally, if it's electrically driven, Kinder Morgan needs to have a lot of electricity. They need to have it co-located very next to their compressor station, and they need increase in easements. So that is why you're hearing a lot of talk about the expansion of the easements by National Grid. Not to mention, if you are an electrical ratepayer, as I am in Dracut, do I have gas in my home? No. My home is not heated by gas. I don't use gas. But hear it now that Massachusetts will be absorbing the cost of the expansion of these electrical easements and all the electrical needs of this compressor station, or whatever Kinder Morgan needs. We are going to pay for it, whether you use the gas or not, whether Dracut uses the gas or not. And we will pay for the pipeline, whether we need the gas or not. So there's an economic side to it. But my concern personally, from a personal standpoint, having asthma, having dealt with the contaminants that came out of the Exxon well, I lived in Dracut all my life with the exception of 7 years in New Hampshire. Love New Hampshire. But that's the problem. I don't want to see this happen again to my area, to my town. We have farms. We grow food. I see some farmers in the audience. This is not something you want on your vegetables. I mentioned it at the August 11th FERC meeting when FERC came to town, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I told them without question, I cannot sell a vegetable if it has something on it. I can't sell a vegetable if somebody thinks there's something on it. Do we want to be known as the pipeline epicenter of New England? Of course not. And we need to look out for all our neighbors along that proposed 420-mile line, because that's an awful lot of piping, and it's going to be going through enormous amounts of changes in topography and elevation, and every 40 to 100 miles, you're going to need a compressor, and it's not going to be fun, and metering stations as well. So I want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, we'll take those a little bit later. Thank you, Julie.
Does anyone have any questions? We have about 5 minutes or so for questions. We had one. We'll let you think about it. Yes? Writing to FERC is really essential. Carolyn, do you want to address that for them?
Certainly. You have until November 20th. I would suggest everybody pick up pen and paper, and the one thing that really drives it home is when you write them a letter in longhand. If you need the address to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, we can provide that information either on drakeitpa.org, that's www.drakeitpa, as in pipeline awareness.org, or you can contact us right here. We'll give you the address. Yes. You shouldn't use the microphone, yes.
By the way, you can add that we have some sheets of...
Okay, great.
I'm wondering if you have had the opportunity to actually contact law enforcement, like federal law enforcement or Homeland Securities?
Yes, I actually have spoken with quite a few authorities. I've spoken to people in the Natural Resources Conservation Department. I've spoken to people in the State Department. I've spoken to lawmakers. I've had meetings with people in Congress who serve as a senator, state representative. I've spoken with people in the EPA. I've spoken to people in the Army Corps of Engineers. I've actually spoken to a variety of compressor design engineers throughout the country. And one gentleman in particular, his name is George White. You can look him up on the internet. He does entertain questions. He lives in Texas. He does not work for Kinder Morgan, but he's always ready and willing to help review a design. He's going to be 93 this month, and I hope I have as many wits about me as he does at 93. I hope I have that much at 73. He's a really wonderful gentleman to speak with. He's willing to review any design questions you have. Yes.
The town of Deerfield Health Department has taken a very strong stand against the pipeline coming through the town of Deerfield, and they've informed Kinder Morgan that they may not enter the town of Deerfield to do surveying. I understand from some lawyers that the health department can be very effective in keeping a pipeline out of town. What's your opinion on that?
The Department, the Board of Health in any town is extremely important. Not important, extremely important. If you have people on the Board of Health who are in your camp and sincerely interested in environmental issues, they have more power than you think. Because in addition to working with the local EPA representatives or your Department of Environmental Protection people, they can help set up within your town added constraints. Deerfield did their homework, and it's time for us to do ours. In the town of Deerfield, the Board of Health is ready and willing to impart knowledge. I've spoken with people outside of Deerfield who are working with that Board of Health, and absolutely you have a lot of power because you have the right to a clean air environment. You have a right as a citizen to know what you're breathing if something like this comes into town. Yes.
I just wanted to mention the fact that this is primarily an export pipeline, and they're just to make more money from it overseas. That's really why they're building it.
With respect to export, it's almost, the common sense approach to that. It's hard to accuse a company saying, I know you're exporting. But if you look at the math and the engineering, and you take Drake, Massachusetts, for instance, which is the terminus, and all this gas is coming in, you take a look at the population of 33,000 people, and do you actually think we're going to use 1.3 billion cubic feet of gas per day? And are we doing this for just 24 years, and what about the decommissioning of something like this, all because of 8 cold days in the winter? You don't even have to say the word export. Yes?
We saw emissions coming from a couple of stacks. I'm wondering about those emissions. First, does the company have to report the composition and the volume of those emissions to any regulatory body? And if those emissions, in fact, pollute the air, are there any anybody in the federal or state government taking a look at that and taking action as a result? Thank you.
Excellent question. The gentleman is asking if the Kinder Morgan company can report in a certain way any of these gas emissions. Well, here's how it works in the gas industry. You've got some of the line coming into Massachusetts, then it heads into New Hampshire, comes back into Mass, and the gas industry has what's called air sheds. You'll have maybe one compressor in Massachusetts, you'll have a metering station here, then you'll have something in New Hampshire, another metering station, a compressor, and regionally, you have all of these grouped together. And this is why we need to give input, and we need to speak to local regulation, because in that air shed, that regional cordoned-off area, if one compressor or one metering station is having a problem, which we do have one on Methuen Street in Drake that has issues, they'll come down, they'll fix a part, and they'll say, well, it looks like we took care of whatever it was, whether it be it noise or I smelled gas, okay, we took care of the gas problem. But what if you have something else over the border in New Hampshire within that air shed vicinity that has an issue? Well, right now, the regulations allow for them to just say, well, we took care of it, and nothing else matters because we met the requirements for that threshold. We need to change the thresholds. We need to alert authorities, and we do have Russell Pandrus, who works as an aide for Congresswoman Nikki Songus, who's doing a tremendous amount of research into this. So this is what we have to do. You have liaisons, we have liaisons, and also unification across interstate coalitions. That is key, and as Julia Steed Mawson has pointed out, we have some information here on the side which will help us continue that effort and let it mount, because that's the only way you get answers is strength in numbers.
We have time for one more question.
One more question?
Oh, I see a question right there.
Yes.
Spill some oil or gasoline and you'll find out in your home how powerful they are. But I don't hear any comments about them doing any sampling at this point.
Yes, come right up.
We met with the DES earlier this week, Monday. They have no interest in being involved in any of this stuff. They also say they have no powers to do anything about this. Strictly, that is true. Federal law overpowers anything that they may actually come up with, but it still makes everything that much more difficult for the gas line company to do if they have to jump through the hoops to meet the DES stuff. At the end of the day, FERC and the federal government overrules what comes out of DES. We asked them if they would give us some help to set up monitoring stations around the potential compressor station. They pointed out that they already had a monitoring station 5 or 6 miles away, and we'd have to make do with that. It's no good. It won't work. Sorry.
Okay, thank you so much. Sam Matthews. Carolyn Zook. I think the key takeaway is the fact that, again, in a democracy, democracy is hard work. This is a complicated problem. It's got many pieces to it, but it is work. So one of the things that we are encouraging you to think about is knowledge, awareness, concern, and action. Things can change in a democracy. It may be slow, but it requires us. So we are encouraging you, inviting you to be a part of the Drake Pipeline Awareness Group, the Pelham Wyndham Pipeline Awareness Group, the New Ipswich Group, whatever town you're in, to get involved, because it may be a David and Goliath, but if there are a lot of us Davids, things can actually happen. And be aware that this pipeline is not the only one that is being scrutinized. There are pipelines everywhere throughout the United States now. The Marcellus shale fields are pumping out a lot of product. It's a lot of investment into that. Understandably, people need returns on their investment, and that means, as David Hennessy puts it, there are many straws going into the Marcellus shale fields, and those straws are going out. So we are not the only people that are concerned about pipelines in our towns. All over the country, people are doing similar things as we are. And it's very important that we not get discouraged, but yet we learn, we get to know more, and we act. And there are many things that we need to do. So one of the things we want to do is to make sure that we keep learning, and that's what we're going to do now. We now have 4 breakout sessions. The sheets that you have on your seats give you a description of those 4 breakout sessions. What I would like is our 4 hosts to please take their places. I would like the speakers that are with those hosts to get themselves in position. And as you can see, there are 4 signs. Hold up your signs so that everyone can see them. Hi. There's a big, tall man that you cannot miss, at any rate. So, Pipeline 101, I'm just going to instruct you. If you're interested in Pipeline 101, that's a great session for folks that are relatively new or new to this. Need or Greed is going to be offered by Ken Hartledge from New Hampshire Plan New England. Engaging elected officials with Melanie Levesque, who is a former representative from Brookline. Affected landowner information is with Joe McGuire from Mason Pipeline Group. And then again, Pipeline 101 is with our Jennifer Chandonnet from Pelham Pipeline Awareness. I'm going to ask you, on the count of 3, to make your decision, and then to get up and self-select yourself. So, take a deep breath, make your decision. 1, 2, 3. Go to those sections, and they will take you from there.